This video is sponsored by Raycon. Let's get one thing out of the way first. I have never played a Final Fantasy game, nor do I understand a single thing about the franchise. I have friends who play it and have attempted to explain it to me, but they would have more luck trying to bring a corpse back to life. As such, I have no emotional attachment to the idea of this movie being called Final Fantasy, even if I can acknowledge that it shares little resemblance to the video games, despite being written and directed by the creator of Final Fantasy and produced by the studio who made the games. However, for the sake of context, if we're looking at this film as a single, solitary entity disassociated from the marketing choice to call it such, this movie is more faithfully called The Spirits Within, and I will be referring to it as so. I remember seeing The Spirits Within at a friend's house when I was 8 years old and being left feeling distinctly empty inside. At that age, I shouldn't really be questioning my own existentialism, but despite seeing so much disturbing content at a young age, there was something in particular about The Spirits Within that made me never want to watch it again. At least until now. I have ruminated on making a video on this odd anomaly for several years, and now that I've just turned 28, god I feel old, I think this is the perfect time to revisit this strangely traumatic and depressing memory in my childhood. The Spirits Within tells the story of Dr. Aki Ross, a scientist on the hunt for 8 unique spirits that she believes will help humanity to defeat a mysterious supernatural alien species known as Phantoms, who ravaged Earth to the brink of extinction in 2065. She soon teams up with a group of commandos led by her ex-lover Captain Gray Edwards and mentor Dr. Sid, only to find herself pressed for time to find the remaining spirits before James Wood's General Douglas uses a massive Zeus cannon to blast the aliens straight to hell. Now, we will get into the finer details in just a second, but as a general overview, The Spirits Within is basically another case of post-apocalyptic misery porn. It's by no means a grave of the Fireflies level of bleakness, but The Spirits Within is drenched in a palpable melancholy. Every character is tired, depressed, defeated, or just barely holding on to their fight for survival, and since the underlying theme of the story is about rediscovering life and re-injuvenating hope in quite a literal way, wow, does this movie like to indulge in melodramatic sadness. At 8 years old, I was not prepared for something like this. I was expecting a sanitized version of Starship Troopers filled with action set pieces and epic monster battles, and what I got was a borderline survival horror, more akin to 9 meets Titan AE. The thing is, The Spirits Within is a deeply intriguing concept wrapped in an incredibly ambitious and costly production that, to be frank, I won't be covering in detail, seeing as it is probably the most talked about aspect of the film's history. There's just no point to me regurgitating what has been covered so many times before for the sake of being repetitive. All you really need to know is that for 2001, this was a groundbreaking piece of animation. In fact, it's not hyperbolic to say that some even argued that The Spirits Within was a potential game changer and would revolutionize the industry, and so regardless of how you and I feel about the actual macabre story within, the level of meticulous detail poured into its production cannot be understated or taken away from it. It is unquestionably an impressive feat of technical design and animation. Now, of course, the film did become the poster child for the uncanny valley, seeing as its efforts to mimic realistic human features and expressions was somewhat hampered by its technical limitations. But at the same time, I think it helps instill a raw discomfort that fits the overall mood of the story, especially when it comes to the genuine horror movie buried within it. As always, as we go along, please make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're feeling generous and want to further support the channel, please consider checking out my Patreon. And now, let me take a quick moment to thank this video sponsor, Raycon. Throughout my Christmas break, I've been zoning out and listening to a lot of horror audio using my always reliable, brilliantly sounding Raycon everyday earbuds. However, this year I'm trying to be more consistently active while working from home, and so Raycon earbuds are perfect for giving me that much needed distraction during repetitive walks or stretch breaks, because I admittedly struggle to keep myself motivated without something to stimulate my attention. But what makes Raycon earbuds extra special is that they provide a variety of different gel tip sizes to make them personal for you, so they never get loose or fall out, especially in those awkward positions. Trust me, they won't budge. I've stubbornly bobbled my head more times than not putting these babies to the test. Starting at half the price of other premium audio brands and with 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life thanks to their slick charging case, it's honestly no surprise that Raycons have received 48,000 5-star reviews, just in case you need a second opinion. You can help out the channel today by getting yourself a pair of great looking, feeling and sounding Raycons by simply clicking the link in the description box below or going to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. And now, back to the video. It's possible I'm now just desensitized to it, but I kinda like the drab and dreary feel of the film, because it makes the moments of beauty and vigor really shine through in the way it's intended. You're supposed to feel the same emotional emptiness and alienation that the characters have succumbed to due to the destruction of their way of life. After all, they're surrounded by nothing but death, decay, and life literally being snatched away, and so glimmers of the world they once held on to inspire fleeting moments of hope. For the most part, we have this constantly soulless flat color palette that contrasts heavily with the more exhilarating shades of life produced by the spirits, which plays precisely into the core theme we'll come to in just a moment. It makes humanity's taken for granted self-reflection feel much more pronounced, if indeed it is aggressively on the nose when it comes to its noble environmentalist anti-war messaging. It could also be because the movie is kinda boring, and any essence of life stops me from totally disconnecting from its monotone delivery. For all the emphasis on human features, the talented cast give generally dry, subdued performances, while James Woods plays it up like he's working for the Death Star. I think it's because it's attempting to go for nuance, which is harder to replicate in animation because it's an inherently dynamic and expressive medium that requires more exuberance to really liven its more unnatural elements. Yet, while James Woods technically brings the most kineticism as the main villain, he's ironically the most out of place amongst the other performers committing to this depressed style of delivery. Again, I don't mind the tone of it. Contextually, it works to emphasize Aki's aspirations for a hopeful, peaceful resolution to a grim situation, but it just doesn't help that the characters end up lacking much personality as a result. In fact, the 4 supporting characters, Sid, Jane, Neil, and Ryan, end up having the most appealing characterization, yet receive the least amount of attention, and this will factor into something significant I'll talk about in the later spoiler section. My biggest issue with the story is simply that I just do not care about Aki and Gray's relationship. It's the one part of the movie where I don't buy the sentimentality of it, despite the core idea of the story being about rekindling what is lost. This is where we need to get into the nitty-gritty of creator Hironobu Sakaguchi's intent, because it's clearly a very personal story, told in a somewhat impersonal way. According to Sakaguchi in the making of the film, the story was conceived as a meditation on the afterlife following the tragic passing of his mother, specifically regarding what happens to our spirits after death. The film establishes that Earth has what is known as a Gaia, which according to academics James Dyke and Tim Lenton, is essentially the controversial theory that life interacts with the world around it to create a stabilizing effect that makes Earth habitable, and it needs to continually self-regulate to ensure its continued survival. Or at least that's what I think it is. It seems like a strange way of manifesting spirituality into science to basically say that the Earth has a soul, so to speak. Or, well, that's what the film implies.
To tell us that the planet is alive? That it has a spirit?
It's for this reason that Aki and Sid plead with Earth's council to cancel General Douglas's plans to use the Zeus cannon to shoot the Phantom's nest, as doing so will likely hit Earth's Gaia, thus killing the entire ecosystem and all life as we know it. It's a ham-fistedly profound way to show how Earth is divided over the most morally appropriate action to deal with the invading alien race, who are later established to not even be there by choice. It's kind of hilariously distressing in the context of today, because you know for a fact that General Douglas would be the kind of guy to have a Twitter account spewing things about woke scientists and snowflakes and social justice warriors, while Aki and her team would be just like, well, it's either this or we just finish what the aliens already started. Now, it does vaguely try to humanize General Douglas's personal motivation by saying his family was wiped out by the Phantoms, but it's so blatantly tacked on in a cheap effort to create empathy that it ends up feeling just as insincere as Aki and Gray's relationship. Again, I think the concept is pretty good on paper, but it just feels to translate this in a truly meaningful way. The closest it comes to it is when Aki explains that each of the spirits she's collected are symbolic of Earth's ecosystem, such as a fish, a deer, a plant, a bird, and a dying little girl who was happy to pass away despite not believing Aki's story about her spirit supposedly returning to Gaia. However, when it comes to the Phantoms, this is where things get spooky and complicated. I will die on the hill of saying that the Phantoms are one of the most underrated alien horrors in fiction. They are an incredibly compelling threat, and when they're on screen, it is impossible to take your eyes off them. That's of course if you can actually see them. They're basically presented as some sort of abstract ethereal abomination of organic matter that fucks you up by either ripping your soul right out of your body as you desperately cling onto it, infecting you with a deadly parasite, or even just simply touching you if they're feeling generous. It is a horrifying danger that mixes supernatural and extraterrestrial to create this petrifying spiritual body horror that can get you from anywhere. Getting eaten or mutilated is one thing, but there's something just viscerally messed up about the Phantoms. They're more or less Grim Reapers, which symbolically makes sense when you consider Sakaguchi's focus on the afterlife. Okay, this is an odd comparison, but it reminded me of this scene in the original Matrix that terrified me as a kid, spoilers by the way, where Cypher betrays the group and unplugs each character and you see them just drop dead. I can't really explain why, but the simplicity of this just haunted me. 1 second you're there, everything is fine and functional, and the next, boom, it's all over.
And it's gone.
Even from a design perspective, I still can't make any sense of what the hell these things are supposed to be, and it leaves a baffling but memorable mystique that otherwise would not be there if they were just generic aliens. However, where things get a little confusing is when the story attempts to reveal the creatures as sympathetic via dream sequences where Aki envisions the final moments of the aliens' home world. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it essentially boils down to the aliens being at war with themselves before their planet was annihilated, sending their spirit remnants through space until eventually landing on Earth. I think it aims to imply a duality between the alien race and humanity, where we are also divided and effectively in civil war, and thus the aliens become this cautionary tale of our potential downfall. It's either that, or the aliens are meant to be this manifestation of violence and conflict, because it's difficult to see them as wanting peace or being misunderstood when, you know, they literally kill everything that moves. Now, I do want to talk about a final major spoiler before we finish, so brace yourself for further bleakness. So remember when I was talking about Gian, Neil, and Ryan being the most dynamic characters but receiving the least attention? Well, when I saw this as a kid, their deaths really got to me for some reason. I think part of it is because I wasn't particularly used to seeing sudden, unceremonious deaths like the way they're presented here. Today, I'm conditioned to expecting anyone to die in media because things like The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones have really propelled the dismantling of plot armor. But despite how emotionally unearned their deaths are due to a lack of development, because Perry Gilpin, Ving Rhames, and Steve Buscemi give charismatic performances, it just felt like the movie ripped out the last bit of energy and hope that the story had. For as needlessly technical as that criticism is, it clearly works on a human level, so it's not really a problem, because it left me with this dwindling desperation as the remaining characters travel to the alien Gaia to save the world before Douglas blows it up. The thing is, when Aki does manage to save the world and put the alien spirits to rest as Douglas poetically brings about his own destruction, it's not really that hopeful of an ending as much as it tries to present it as such. Gray ends up sacrificing himself to transfer the final spirit into the Gaia, and while I did not care much for his character, I'm just left feeling sorry for Aki because, yay, the world is saved, but on a personal level, she has lost her true love, so to speak. She's not left with this reinvigorating relief like your typical hero. She seems more exhausted and self-reflective. What do we do now? What comes next? Ultimately, the real work has just begun. When I look back at the film today, I'm not left feeling the same emptiness I did when I was a kid. If anything, I'm left more underwhelmed because I'm basically used to it at this point, but I can better see the maturity that seeps its way through that I simply wasn't able to process in the past. And that is The Spirits Within. If you have a recommendation for a future video, please leave it in the comments below. And until next time, stay safe, stay away from soul-sucking phantoms, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye!